New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring. Again, dear ones, Rev Brz with you over here.
Rev Z right here.
And this is today here on the New Thought Media Network. And I want you to know we are super excited. I just looked at my banner, realized that I've misspelled our guest's name, so I'm going to fix that before we bring her on. But we've got a heck of a conversation for you today, so dig in. We want to introduce you to our special guest, Dr. Rita Fierro. I'm going to read a little bit from the back of her book. We got a book to talk about today, folks, and it's an important one. And on that book jacket, it says, for 20 years, Dr. Rita Fierro has guided the unpicking of patterns of systemic inequities. Dr. Rita heads a consulting firm that evaluates projects, researches social inequities, and provides processes that illuminate complexities for businesses, foundations, nonprofits, NGOs, and the United Nations on 4 continents. Yeah, that. Good stuff to start. She facilitates conversations below the surface while honoring deep human longings, sitting face to face with the personal pain of hundreds of people. Dr. Rita has a PH.D. in African American Studies from Temple University and a master's in sociology from the University of Rome, Italy. Dr. Rita co-founded Home for Good Coalition as to transform systemic racism in our country. Dr. Rita, I'm so grateful you are here. This is a conversation we love to have, and you're here at the request and the suggestion of one of our viewers. So thank you for that, and thank you. And that name just slipped right out of my head, so I apologize. But folks, if you're watching today, please feel free to join the broadcast. Let us know where you're from and join in as we go. Dr. Rita, anything I missed in that introduction?
Oh, nothing at all. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. We're excited you are here. All right. Now, folks, we've been having a great conversation up until now, getting ready. The book is called Digging Up the Seeds of White Supremacy. And I love it. We've got a number of classifications here at the bottom I want to read. I don't think they'll show on the screen. Economic, child welfare, medical, legal, educational, juvenile justice, housing, criminal justice, overall welfare. It's a thick book, Dr. Rita, and what I've found so far is you're really delving in deeply to the topic, the subject, and the healing that's going to happen. Share with everybody a little bit. How'd you get started in this work? And you've been doing it for quite a while now, so give us a little bit of the background.
Yeah. I've been studying systemic racism and racism for the past 30 years. And it started with a very simple childhood memory of being 5 years old. I'm, of course, identified white. I'm Italian American. I was born in the United States in the Bronx, New York. My parents are originally from Italy, and I also lived half of my life in Italy. And I kind of live on both coasts at this point in my life. So in my Italian American family, we talk about everything. Unlike the kind of WASP principle of no politics and religion at the dinner table, we talk only about politics and religion at the dinner table. So it's pretty typical to talk about these extremely controversial topics because Sunday dinner or holiday dinners are practically the way that we interact, or a big way we interact with the world, and we come together and in love. Right. I come from a really loud Southern Italian family. And so we're not conflict averse by any means. And so I remember being 5 years old under the table and hearing a person in my family in their racist speech. It was the 80s. Affirmative action was there, and this person was claiming a black person had been promoted above them. At which my mother replied, "You don't have a college degree. How are you going to complain about this person getting promoted above you when they were more qualified than you?" And my mother's a huge truth teller, and I'm really thankful to her for the journey that I'm on. I couldn't be on it without her. But I remember being at the table, being a child of the 80s, having had African-American children bus to my school. Not really, I would say, having true African-American friends. I had never been to their houses. I had never eaten with them, which in Italian culture means you're not really close. Right. But I still had this feeling of right and wrong, being a child of the 70s. And so it was sort of like a punch to my gut. Like, it's wrong, because every time he would say black, there was this cadence. No, he got promoted because he was black. He did this, he passed above me because he was black. And I could feel the hatred in the word. And all I could process as a little kid was, this is wrong. He should not be talking like that. The emotion behind this word is wrong. And, at that point, my mother spoke up for kind of the other voice, and I, as a child that I was, kind of went back to playing under the table and let it go. But over the years, as I grew up, I realized I started becoming quiet, because I internalized, as most white people do, that to oppose the dominant racism that gets expressed in the absence of black people, we get chastised ourselves. And so we learn to suppress this inner voice in our bodies that says it's wrong. And I spent a lot of family dinners in the bathroom, nauseous. And in particular, there was a day when I was 19, yet another family dinner, a different circumstance. And I remember looking myself in the mirror with mascara down to my cheeks and finally having kind of an awakening moment where I said, how do you expect people who don't feel what you feel to change anything? You feel it. You feel it. It's your job to do something about this.
Right.
Get to work. And that's where it started.
Right on. I love the fact that your model is your mother, to be able to step up and say no. And that's true. I think that's really true of where we want to be in society. That's where it starts. Each one of us teach by teaching our kids and being able to say no in the face of everything. Z, what's running through your brain over there, my friend?
Yeah, well, first of all, so glad to have you with us, Doc. This is a conversation that I think is going to be with us, as they say in the hood, for a minute. And it's about time and the unfortunate events of COVID and the unfortunate event of George Floyd culminating moment in time that allowed us to see that all of the systems that have been set up in this country, politics, housing, medicine, they're all failing because they're not service that they say they are, which is for the people and by the people and that whole preamble. And so when I think about raised in the South, having grandparents and great grandparents after slavery and great grandparents who were slaves, there's a difference in how blacks were supposed to.
See, we're gonna drop it. We're gonna jump on top of you here because your audio is jumping in and out on us, breaking up pretty badly.
Okay, I'm gonna go out and come back in.
Yes, let's do that.
I'll be right back.
No worries. That is the pleasure of live broadcasting folks, we never really do know what's going to happen, and sometimes technology is what it is. So okay, so we shared some of this in the pre-show, Dr. Rita, and so LZ will be able to catch up when he comes back in. Help us understand the turning point. So yes, you're aware of your inner, let's call it, desire to bring more equity, to not be playing the games, the racist games and all of that. And you shared with us earlier one of those turning point moments for you, where you were, and specifically around the George Floyd experience. Seems to be really a calling card, a wake up moment for so many people. And we'd love to hear a little bit more of what that was for you.
Yeah. If it works for you, I want to share one turning point before George Floyd to kind of explain a little bit more why, after studying systemic racism for 30 years, like, I'm not a prominent voice, right? Like, I'm not the first person you hear on the news about it. I didn't speak out. No one saw me on TV during George Floyd's murder, after George Floyd's murder, right? So, on the earlier part of my journey, my knowledge was predominantly academic, right? So I gained a master's in sociology in Italy. And once I realized the nature of systemic racism in the United States, I just kind of did what a lot of progressive people do, which is just read as many books as I could. It's like, what is this? Why is this alive? And I just kind of did the armchair thing and just tried to read more and more to get to understand. Realizing that my prior perceptions were erroneous and just wanting to find out more. And I did that for several years. And then when I moved to the United States and began my PhD in African American Studies, I was surrounded by African American scholars. The majority of my teachers were African American, and then I found myself in predominantly African American spiritual community. Shout out to the Center of Peace, Philadelphia, which is under Centers for Spiritual Living. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so what happened is that, and then I found myself also with a Reiki teacher who's Black. And my mentors, there are 3 Black women that have had made a humongous impression in my life, but 2 in particular were the ones I met early on, would just have this way of crossing their arms and just kind of looking at me sideways and say, why do you care so much about us? What's going on with you? Right. And their stance was for me to understand that if racism hit me so much to my stomach, it was because my stomach was holding my personal pain. Right. That was then hooking into the social injustice of African Americans, which wasn't wrong, but it meant that I was facing the injustice of African Americans to avoid the injustices that were done to me as a child and to my own personal pain. Yes. So the saviorism, basically, they didn't call it that way, but they were pointing out early on that my attention to social justice was actually escapism. Okay. And so for 20 years, I really had a hard time anytime I wrote an article, every time I wanted to write an article or start a podcast or do something, because I could always hear my mentors' voices, like, why are you doing this? What are you trying to escape in yourself, right? So I put actually as dominant in my journey the taking care of me, the reconnecting with my body, the somatic work that Resmaa Menakem talks about, right? Of really feeling our bodies and feeling where is it that we're holding the trauma? How is it showing up when we're in predominantly Black spaces, right? How is all of that showing up? When George Floyd was murdered, in my personal journey, my personal healing work, I was on my knees. I was having a come to Jesus moment where, although I don't consider myself Christian anymore, and I very much consider myself spiritual, I realized that the Catholic God I was raised with, I was very much still pissed off at. I had been trying to have children and wasn't able to conceive, and I just came to this point, and I lost all of my work in a week during COVID and the week of the lockdown. I lost a year of work. And I very much was pissed at God and was just temper tantrums with God and said, listen, God, I did it all right. I followed all the rules. I didn't get pregnant in high school. Like I waited here, I waited there. I did it all right. I went to school. I finished high school. I finished college. I got a PH.D. Like I followed all the damn rules because I had spent most of my life trying to be perfect. So why isn't my life the life I want? And on top of that coming to Jesus moment came the murder of George Floyd, and me really having a second coming to Jesus moment of what the hell is my life worth if I spent 30 years studying something and I have nothing to say? And so this book, Digging Up the Seeds of White Supremacy, became a combination of me looking myself in the mirror and realizing that all that entitlement was whiteness.
Yes.
And the combination of that and seeing systemic racism rise in the conversation nationally. But for the most part, I was watching people talk about something that I didn't actually think they understood, given the studies I had done.
Gotcha.
I know that was a little bit of a long answer, but that's kind of the arc.
Not a worry. Welcome back, Rev Brz. You missed it all.
Oh my goodness. And hopefully my voice is not skipping.
We got you a little bit better now, yes.
Yeah, I probably got to get a faster processor now, I guess. As you know, this technology, it keeps moving. So what did I miss? Give me a thumbnail.
The thumbnail is I told the George Floyd story that we talked about in prep of my coming to Jesus moment. But I also shared that before that, one of the reasons I hadn't spoken up for so many years, though I was studying systemic racism, is that I had Black women mentors who taught me that I was concerned about social justice because I was trying to escape my own healing. And I was trying to avoid facing myself in my own pain, and that my pain was hooking into other people's pain, and that Black people didn't need to be fixed by me. So I've been quiet for a long time because my healing journey had to come first. And then this book kind of came as a resurgence from, not that I'm healed by any means, I'm still in the work. As long as I'm alive, I will be. But I'm far enough on my healing journey to be able to start seeing the patterns between the unhealed parts of me and white thinking and white supremacist thinking, which I think is any time we try to be superior, we're in white supremacist thinking. And how the system was actually set up with the backbone of fear.
Yeah, and that's important too, because as I think back to stories and lessons I learned in the South, you know, the overseers, if you will, we go all the way back to the plantation, just to plant a seed, if you will, that a lot of the cruelty that came out of those relationships and doing Jim Crow was because there was a working white middle class that felt just as deprived, if you will, in a lot of ways, as their Black counterparts. So their only retort was to take it out on someone who they could legally take it out on, which were the Black residents or people of color. And so that perpetually set up a system where those ideas, those habits, those concepts were passed down from generation to generation. And so once I think, once someone wakes up to that idea and realize that it is a lie, that, you know, I think about one of my best friends, and his mom was like my surrogate mother, if you will. She was a house attendant, right? A house manager, as we'll give it a better term than it used to be. And she did everything for this family. And I could only think about the schizophrenic ideas that must have gone on in the kid's head, where this person was there for them from everything from homework to putting a Band-Aid on the knee to talking about the first boyfriend, girlfriend. Yet, if I saw you on the street, I couldn't speak to you.
Yes.
I mean, so that whole mindset is crazy unto itself. And then trying to think about how I present myself as this superior person creates all manner of havoc in your brain.
I love that you went there, Reverend Z, because the people I've coached who had African American nannies talk about this passionate, unconditional love for their nanny that they felt had to be the biggest secret with their parents.
Yes.
And I argue that as children, we know that race is such a bomb concept, it can undermine our relationship with our own parents. And so I argue that part of why internalized white supremacy is so deep and Black people don't have to be in the room for it to show up is because basically it compromises our own relationships with our own parents. So the reasons why white folk, I think, are so invested in the system is because we are trying to prove our value in the face of families that we believe will toss us out in a second. And I've never seen families in any culture around the world disown their children with the ease with which I've seen white families disown their children. You don't marry the right person. You don't marry the person I wanted. Not of the right status, not of the right color, not at the right time. You decide to keep the baby because you got pregnant. Like, of course, you're homosexual. That's also true for, GLBT folks among us, right? That's also true in other cultures. That's prominent in other cultures, but in white families, disowning is actually very common for a plethora of reasons. Yeah. And so I think that shakes our foundation, because then not only do we not believe we're not whole, perfect, and complete, because we live in a world that makes us believe we're not whole, perfect, and complete, but we don't even think we're whole, perfect, and complete to our own mamas.
Right. Yeah. And then you throw on top of that model the interracial relationships that happen when those things were most definitely taboo, to have to sleep with or have a slave mistress or whatever they wanted to call.
Oh no, we lost him.
Z, we lost your mic. No, not yet.
Reverend Robert, I'm wondering if we could take a moment to comment on some of the comments that are coming up.
Absolutely.
So that Reverend Elzea can kind of find his way back to us audio-wise. I see the comments in the chat here, and I think my question back to the folks here is, it's interesting to me that as white people, when we enter conversations like this, we immediately want a credential, and we want to say, oh, I'm and I know I started the conversation by saying I've studied this for 30 years and I have a PhD, right? To some extent, I do that because we're in a world that expects that of me, and I'm talking to you right on a TV show. But the fact that even in common language and even in commenting, we feel the need to do this credentialing, right? Like this, here are my qualifications, therefore I know what I'm talking about. Like, right. I invite you to think about what is it that has you step there, right? Like, I don't know who you are, but based on the little kind of bios that I'm seeing in the comments, you haven't studied this for 30 years. So what is it that has you interface with me, who may know a couple of things? You may have different opinions from me, and that's fine. But over 30 years, maybe I've learned a couple of things. And what is it that has you interface with me as first thing? This is everything I know, and this is why I know it. Right? Like, I think that's the superiority that I'd like us to start. You talked a little bit about shifting the conversation. I would love for us to shift the national conversation around race, for us white folk to get really real and look ourselves in the mirror in all the ways that we try to be superior and all the ways we play these games. And this is one of them.
Yes.
So, to our listeners, I'm happy you're listening. Thank you for listening. And I'm just going to put that challenge out to you. Like, why do you enter a conversation with someone who has like a significant amount of experience and knowledge with, this is what I know and this is how I know it? Like, even that's something to look at. Yeah. And I'm not saying I'm immune from it. I have to check it out in myself too.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, right? I hope I'm coming back in sounding clear here, but
yes.
But challenge is this whole idea of superiority is at the root of all evil, right? I believe, because as we were talking earlier, and this is my belief, and there are others who believe this way, that part of the idea of suppressing people of color, people of African American or African descent specifically, is that when the slave owners looked and said, look, we are working these people to can't see in the morning, to can't see at night. They have the worst living conditions, the worst food. I mean, we can physically whip them 50 lashes and they still survive. They still are joyful. They still have a sense of family and honor. If we were to give these people a fair chance, we might be in trouble. I'm just saying. And so I need to, just like on any other thing, if you're trying to suppress someone, the thing that you do is you try to do it either physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. And African American people were lambasted on all fronts. They could only have the slave master's religion. They could only show expressions or emotions if they were supporting the master. They were not given any education, and the food that they were given and the work hours was unbelievable. And so Malcolm X said this: no one gives up power. Power is either inherited or taken, for the most part. There are other ways, but that's the majority of it. And so, myself included, if I got power, I may not want to walk around and say, oh, you want some power? Here, take mine, right? And so we have to begin to first realize that we all have access to a universal power, and that second, the only difference between person A and B and C is the amount of melanin in their skin. Now, we can go into a whole nother conversation about melanin, but there's another place and time for that. But other than that, there is the capacity for each and every one of us to do well, to be excellent, and to support one another. Because as I said earlier, before my mic went out, I'm a fourth Irish, right? My great grandfather was Irish, right? And so at some point, even that must have been a problem, and it still is. I'm putting down my son, or I'm putting down my daughter. We just look at Thomas Jefferson and that whole big thing. And that was not an isolated idea. That was common. That was common. And so, we really, as you said, Doc, have to take a look at ourselves. And we've all, Black, white, Native American, we've all been affected by this crazy idea of superiority. So I mean, we have work to do, and those who aren't afraid to do it come to the table. They may come fired up, but they come humbled as well. That's been my experience.
So I'd like to add something to that picture. I think that's absolutely true. And there's a beautiful Aboriginal Australian, Yucca Porta, who wrote a book called Sand Talk. And he says that his whole society, right, that Aboriginal Australian society was designed to keep in check the I'm better than you voice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the whole society was designed because there was an understanding that for anyone who's like knows the Native American story of there are two wolves in all of us, right? The one that's ready to attack and the one that's ready to love. And which one wins? The one you feed. So Native American societies, for the most part, and in this case, Aboriginal Australian society, was designed for that wolf to not win.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that European societies and colonial societies were actually designed for that wolf to win.
Yes. Yes.
And so thinking for a moment about, like, a lot of my work, I talk about a shift of consciousness, right? Like overcoming fear that's embedded in our institutions takes a shift of consciousness, which is in part individual, in part movement building. But it can't just be consciousness. And this is, we get spiritual bypassy when we think it's just the thing that we do in our individual homes and it shifts everything. Yes, that contributes. It's super important. It's where we have personal power, to your point, Reverend Z. But there also is the fact that our whole society is organized to support the superiority, in particular of rich white men. And that white women have benefited from it because the whole narrative, most rich white men think they're protecting their women, I would argue. Right? So we've benefited from it in some, we're also been oppressed by it, but we don't actually, most of us don't see how we've been oppressed by it. And we don't see that, we actually see that, you know, I need something and people come towards me. So the issue is not only how am I going to shift my consciousness, the issue is also how am I going to organize so that we can begin to envision communities that are not grounded in how am I better than you, but are actually grounded in how do all our needs get met at the same time. And Native societies had that set up.
Right. Well, you know, it's enlightening for me that you bring up the Aborigine society. I lived in Australia for 2 years and met with quite a few Aborigines, and their whole thing of this evolutionary process of the individual is so ingrained in their culture that they take on different names as they progress through life, because they understand that as they move forward, their consciousness has shifted. And so there may be a time in life where you think you are the number one chief honcho, but as you continue to evolve, you realize, you know, I was just a peon then as I am right now. And so if you have that kind of idea in your consciousness, that quite actually goes along with human development. I mean, how many of us know young people who think they are invincible? And when they get a little older, that invincibility starts going down the drain because they're like, ooh, I could break my leg. I could fall off here and hurt myself. And so when we can take that idea of evolution and remember that sometimes I may get off track, as you were saying, and I may think I'm superior, but when I get a reality check like we had with George Floyd or we had with COVID, all those things that puts a strain on the system that we depended on for power, and it's no longer there, or it's been tampered with, now you come face to face with yourself and your ideas about life and philosophy and people. Now we have to think newly if we want to progress, because that was, quite frankly, I believe that whole triad of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud down in Georgia, that was a situation that made a shift in consciousness and shift in time frames that we all now have to get adjusted to.
I would argue it made that shift because we were actually listening. Like COVID forced us to pause.
Yes.
So we were actually listening.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would argue is that I talk about this in the book, that systems are created in times of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So the blindness of systems and systemic racism is that we all get overwhelmed by this big picture thinking. And so most people shy away from the big picture thinking that it's so overwhelming that they want to narrow it down. But when we don't see the whole big picture, we don't see the patterns. Yeah. And so in times of crisis, so we assume that systems are so big we can't change them. Like all the systems, which are all the United States institutions that we can think of. You were listing them earlier in the introduction, Reverend Robert, right? Like the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system, the welfare system, the legal system, right? Educational system. Like all of these systems are, well, at most 500 years for some of them that are like the oldest, they were planted. But a lot of them, like the social welfare system, is a lot younger, actually, right? And they didn't always exist, and they look different in different societies. They're created by a group of humans who come together and say, we have this problem, we want to find a solution that's collective. It's easier to find a solution together for health than me trying to go up the mountain and go find a herb every time I'm sick, right? So in times of crisis, humans come together because the dis-ease is strong enough that it works to come together. And I would argue that COVID-19 is that opportunity right now. To your point, Reverend Z, about the systems kind of falling apart. I think they're showing, people stop showing up to work because people who are used to living on $9 an hour salary, who get unemployment and don't have to pay childcare, can put half of that aside. Because poor people weren't stupid. Poor people always knew how to save money. So now you have unemployment. I'm one of those people. I lived like, I don't know, 2 years when I got an unemployment 1 year, right? Like people knew, and then people got brave and said, no, I actually want to go. Now that I've faced my biggest fear, which was to lose everything.
Right.
Now I actually want to go for what I want. And then people stop showing up for work. And how does that benefit us societally? So yeah, there are things that are falling apart, and it's not because people are spoiled. It's because people are daring to dream, because we faced a major fear. And when you face a major fear and overcome it, you come out understanding the truth of who you are. We would say in Science of Mind, like you understand that you have the creative power to do everything, because facing our fears has that sort of power. And so we are at a time where we can actually envision new systems. And I state we have the collective power to shift the system. It was designed to oppress. It was designed to support the needs of rich white men, no one else. But we don't have to get locked into that. So shifting consciousness is important, but we also have to get to work on the collective level. Because if it doesn't shift collectively, our institutions are gonna.
Well, you know, here's the thing. You know, you bring up so many points, and Robert, you had something to say. You go ahead before I.
No. You go.
Because you know, you talk about systems. So there's this whole idea of system dynamics and system thinking, right? Where, and if we bring quantum physics in on the tail end of that, system thinking says that we have to think about things systemically, because we live in a systemic world. There is a system that is the foundation of this planet, that is the foundation of the universe. And when we get out of line with that, there's a problem. And the other part of it is when we run into chaos, which was what we ran into during the pandemic. Chaos from a system theory perspective says the old system is dying and a new system is forming.
Yes.
It's not that it's chaos, that the formation of this new thing has not been there enough, or has not solidified enough, or you are looking at it very myopically. And you have to look at the total system to see that it's reforming. And so when we can begin to think that way and act that way, so that we don't become fearful when everything I have is taken away, or we don't become afraid when my previous position on top seems to now be shifting towards the bottom, and just allow the system, which is equitable, which is just, to fold as it should be, then we can move beyond some of the superficial things that get us stuck. And I think you know, when we look at quantum physics, and it always says, if you're looking at like the Fibonacci sequences, it says if you look at any big thing, it is a small thing that has been replicated in numerous amount of times to make it complex. So they have all these Fibonacci sequences where they can take a flower of a broccoli and hold it to the head of a broccoli, and they look the same, and so forth and so on, right? So we have to begin, I believe, and I think your book sets a great framework for that, is we have to begin to think holistically, right? And I mean, we could go up. I mean, Ken Wilber has a good system on holarchies, right? Where every time we move to one level, we not only go to a new level of understanding, but we also incorporate what we just left, so that I can remember that, ooh, I didn't like that down there. I better stay up here at this next level of understanding. So we have the models, we have everything we need. Now we have to give up the ego and the fear that someone or somebody or something is going to be left behind. The universe doesn't work that way.
I love that, and I'm wondering if we can offer our listeners, our viewers, a couple of images for that holism that you're talking about, Reverend Z. Hosea.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest one, right, is a cell or a molecule. We go from a molecule or atom to a molecule. The atom doesn't disappear; it just gets absorbed into the molecule. The molecule becomes a organ, right? And the organ becomes a person. A person becomes a family. Family becomes a society. Each level of ladder includes the lower vibration. And so,
Z, I'm sorry. I think we let you talk too long. You started breaking up on us again, and I think we let you go a little too long on that one, my brother.
Yes.
So I think there are a couple of things I can say to fill in here until we get you back, Reverend Z. So I love what you're saying about molecules. So yeah, you can bring it back. Bring back the image. That's great. I love what you're saying about molecules. So the intention of me writing this book was me actually looking for what were the original intentions. So if George Floyd is the effect, George Floyd's murder is the effect, and all the other atrocities that make us, our hearts break day by day, are the effects, or are the fruits of a tree. What is the seed? Right? That was the question that I was sitting with. Because I stand in, if you know the seeds, the fruits won't surprise you. And I think this assumption is underneath most of it. And then we'll come to the tree in a second. I'll actually talk about the seed. But the assumption embedded in the United States, all United States institutions, is that in order for the basic needs of whites to be met, safety, belonging, and dignity, and so therefore for whites to thrive, the needs of Black, Indigenous, people of color have to be forsaken. So in order for whites to thrive, the needs of others have to be forsaken. And the system, I would argue, is this wall that is literally built to keep those needs separate. Mm-hmm. Could you show us the tree for a second? And so then when you look at that assumption underneath all of our systems, what ends up happening is that, and this is kind of what my research showed, and it's research that started with my dissertation work decades ago, is that each system actually splits into two and treats differently the poor and the not poor. And then because of how racism is structured, Black folk get trapped, whether they're poor or not, into what was designed for the poor. And so the organizing principle, I would argue, the seed is fear, with the three variations: control, safety, and saviorism. And I'm wondering, and this is kind of I know this tree is a lot of information. Don't worry if it doesn't land. It's kind of the backbone. It's sort of like a summary of the book. So as you read the book, the tree kind of comes alive. But the bottom line that I want to say is that this is not the only way in which society can be organized. And Reverend Robert, if you can move to the next image, and then maybe we can come back to the tree if we want to. Native societies were not organized under the principle my needs have to be met like your needs have to be forsaken for mine to be met. Native societies were organized under this principle, that if you take care of the land, of the needs of the land, and you take care of the needs of community, the needs of the selves will be addressed. And I see this, like, I've seen this in studying Native American societies. I've seen this in studying Indigenous African societies. The priority is taking care of the land we stand on that gives us food and water, and the community who inhabits it. So the reason I would argue that that question of molecules that you were talking about, Rev Brz, is that what we have done is taken this principle of fear. I'm scared that my needs won't be met, so I'm going to control you so that I can get my needs met. And we've built all of our institutions around it. And it's insane. And it's killing us. It's killing us white folk too. It's killing our planet. We cannot continue to be alive inside of that illusion.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was Alan Watts who said, we didn't come from the land, we came out of the land, right? We are a product of this environment. We emerged from this place. And so when we desecrate the land, we're desecrating ourselves. The Native American, there's a Native American that says, man has not spun the web, or that man is a part of the web. Anything you do to the web, you do to yourself, right? And so we've forgotten that based on this fear of the unknown. I don't know what the environment's going to do. I don't know what these people are going to do. I don't know if the buffalo are going to come back, right? But if you're tapped into the systemic way that life works, you understand the cycles. And those cycles are just movements of evolutionary expansion in everything, consciousness and everything below it, so that we begin to trust the process, trust the system, the natural system. It's what you, and that's what the indigenous who were around long before we had cell phones and computers, their technology was to be observant, right? To watch when the Nile flood and when it doesn't flood, to watch when the sun gets at a certain point, because the technology was a technology of observation and introspection, and to do as most societies have, as above, so below. And so in a white supremacist society, there is no parallel between above and below. There's a superiority of above and below. And the below is just as important, if not more important, because without any roots growing in the soil, there will be no upper leaves or limbs or fruit. So, we got the model kind of flipped out.
I agree with you with a small variation. I would say it's not the fear of the unknown that's driving, it's white male trauma. It's the unprocessed trauma that Europeans brought with us. Yeah. So thinking about it being Indigenous Peoples Day yesterday, right? Writing this book really landed the importance of shifting from Columbus to Indigenous Peoples Day, because it is not healthy for a human being to leave home, like go across the Atlantic, be given water and shelter, literally water, right? There was, like, Europeans did not know where the sweet water was. So if Native Americans had not shown them where the rivers were and where the clean water was, because they could have seen the river from the ocean, but where the clean water was, where the sources of the water were, Europeans would have not survived, because they couldn't survive on salt water. They didn't know the land enough to actually provide for themselves. So in the face of someone having, it drives me crazy because Columbus was Italian, right? So and we really have an honoring of guests. So in the face of someone who has hosted me, I turn around and say, oh, let me enslave 15 of you and bring you back to my queen. That is not normal.
Right.
That is traumatic behavior. For me to enslave another, there's a part of me who is enslaved. Columbus was in a tremendous amount of debt. His papa had just passed some of his property to him so the banks wouldn't take it away. He was a frightened individual with a big dream, like a tremendously frightened and wounded individual with a really big dream. And so I would say the anchor, I would say, is more than the fear of the unknown. I would say it's trauma. And in the face of trauma, I can't empathize with you because I am so worried about my own safety, I can't see you.
Yeah.
And so part of what we need to do is heal our own. Because when we heal our own, then we can see the pieces you were saying, that we are all connected. And when I say to you, I disagree with you, therefore I'm not willing to talk to you anymore and pretend that's healing, right? Well, yeah, okay, go away for a little bit and go heal. But eventually, if that's your mama, your papa, your sister, or your Black brother and sister who you claim to love, you need to hear this other perspective. I don't care if you agree with it or not.
Yeah, that's key because, you know, circle of 360 degrees as we have defined it. So that means in any circle, there's at least 360 different viewpoints and wisdom points that come from there. And so again, it speaks to that wholeness of life, right? I mean, everybody got a little slice, and you know, until we get everybody's 1% of the 360 in there, we don't have a whole circle or a whole pie or a whole world, however you want to use the metaphor. And that's what this healing does. And it starts, I agree with you, is that the trauma of separation, and which starts with superiority, because the moment I separate something, I no longer see the allness of it. And given the environment we live in, somebody got to be on top, somebody got to be on bottom, or somebody got to be in control. So we think.
Mm-hmm. Folks, if you wonder what you've stumbled into today, this is New Thought Today on the New Thought Media Network. We've been having a great conversation. I'll bet some technical difficulties. We're going to have to wrap this up here in just a moment. Before we do, I want to give a quick shout out to our organizational sponsors and those folks that make the financial aspects of all of this happen. Please don't go away. Stay with us. We'll be back with final thoughts in just a moment. For now, help us say thank you to everyone that makes this network possible.
Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, for your continued support. Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown Atlanta, for your monthly contribution. Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, for your monthly contribution. And please help us welcome Om Center for Spiritual Living in La Mesa, California. Thank you for your monthly donation. Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, for your most generous donation. And a special thanks to Hefferlin Foundation for your generous technology grant. And Suze Ajit, thank you for your very generous donation. And a super special thank you to Dr. Tracy Brown, RSCP. Thanks for being a super donor. And a big shout out to all our committed donors.
Yes. Thank you, all of our committed givers and organizational donors. All right, we're up to final thoughts here, folks, before we run out of time today. Mine's easy because I'm the privileged white guy in the room. I'm part of the problem, and I love sitting here keeping my mouth shut and listening and learning. And that's the first step for most of us, listening and learning. And I really believe digging up the seeds of White Supremacy is going to be one of those books you want on your shelf and one of those places where you want to go to learn and to listen. It's available on Amazon, pretty much all the places where you can find books, and you can connect with Dr. Rita directly on her website. That's going across the bottom of your screen right here, right now as well. All right, Dr. Rita, final thoughts for the day.
First, I wanted to say there's also an audiobook.
Yes.
It's going up on Audible soon. It's on Apple Books and Google Play for now.
Oh, good.
Read by me. another journey of itself.
Yep. And I forgot you have a podcast as well.
I do. It's called Collective Power. So you can look it up at collectivepowermedia.com or just look for Collective Power anywhere you get your podcasts. It's on all the platforms.
Yes. Good.
Thank you. I think the last thoughts that first of all, I love this conversation. Thank you for having me. There's the bridge. You talked a little bit before, Reverend Z, about how Black folk have been profoundly mistreated, and that's absolutely true. And that there's a lot of work that Black folk have to do internally to continue to survive in the face of the past and the present. I generally look at this work as reconciliation work, and I look at it as a bridge, right? So a bridge requires, to be a bridge, 2 pillars and a center. And so I would argue that the work that you were alluding to that African Americans and people of color do is often one side of that bridge, wherever you can see my hand. The work that we as white folk have to do, and that I've mentioned on this podcast, on this show, is on the other side. So often when I talk about the wounds of white people, people think I'm saying like Black folk need to take it on. I'm like, no. We white folk have to do this work with ourselves. And not alone at home, but create community where it's okay for us to release the guilt and the shame and the pain of, everything we were raised with. Because again, we don't oppress another unless we're oppressed ourselves. We can't give what we don't have. So we're giving what we received. And then there's the bridge, the part in the center, right? If we have 2 pillars without having the common conversation, there's no bridge. They're just 2 pillars.
Yeah.
And so I say to people, I think all 3 of those are necessary. And when it comes to leading and stewarding the work, different people are called in different directions. Go where your heart takes you. But ultimately, I think we all have to do those different dimensions of the work. As a society, we need all 3 of them to be able to birth something new.
Yeah. And I would say, as a final thought, we all have healing, introspective approaches that we need to go through, Black, white, brown, indifferent, right? Because we've all been affected by this system, and so this, as you said, there's internal family stuff that everybody needs to do before we come out to the world, and not to so that we come out with this unified perspective, so to speak, but so that we agree upon what is important to get done now. And I think my final thought would be is let's begin to build these bridges and come as a complete pole, a complete a stand to hold that bridge, so that I understand what my issues, my prejudices are. I understand what my grievances are. I understand what my trauma is. And I'm working the trifecta to try to heal as much of it and all of it as I can as we move through. And that's what it's going to take. Freedom of speech to each other in safe places, and be willing to listen, learn, and change.
And so it is.
And so it is.
Amen. Thank you, sir. All right. And thank you, folks, for watching. This is New Thought Today on the New Thought Media Network. We'll be back again next Tuesday. And Dr. Rita, I do hope that you'll be able to come back and join us again, because, yes, this much deeper ranging conversations are absolutely possible here.
I'm absolutely looking forward to it. Also, there's a webinar that's on the 25th in particular, organized by the Diversity and Equity Committee at CSL. that I'll be leading. So look out for an invitation, or, it should go out soon. You should probably be able to Google it within a few hours. Looking forward to, that's another opportunity for us to continue the conversation.
Absolutely. All right, folks, we're out of here for today. This is New Thought Media Network. Stay with us. We'll be back a little later this afternoon. I know there's more programming coming up. Spanish language programming at 6 o'clock tonight, and then our 8:15 prayer time as well. On behalf of everyone here on New Thought Media Network, thanks for being with us. We wish you peace and richest blessings. Bye now.